AP World Chapters 9, 14, 15, and 23. Chapter 9, State, Society, and the Quest to Salvation.
The Mauryan Empire was led by Chandragupta Maurya in 321 BC. In 269 BC, Ashoka began his rule and conquered Kalinga. Ashoka was the conqueror and an independent leader of the Mauryan Empire from 268 to 232 BC. When he died, the Mauryan Empire started to break apart, and eventually, in 185 BC, the Greeks invaded India, which began the 5 centuries of turmoil. The Han Dynasty was started by Liu Bing in 202 BC. This helped strengthen the central government. In 141 BC, Wudi began his reign. He conquered neighboring regions and started civil services. During the 1st century, Han rulers encouraged the Silk Road trade with the West. Throughout this dynasty, the Chinese invented paper, collar harnesses, and the watermill. The Gupta Empire was established by Chandragupta in AD 320. Chandragupta II, the most powerful emperor during this time, started his reign in 415 AD and expanded Indian art, literature, and dance. In AD 500, Indian astronomers realized that the earth is round, and mathematicians calculated the value of pi and the length of a solar year. Trade was spreading Indian culture, Hinduism, and Buddhism. Hinduism was the idea that there were many gods and that they were all faces of Brahman. They believed in the holy books of Vedas, Upanishads, and Mahabharata. Hinduism sought karma, and their final goal was moksha, which was the cycle of rebirth. The idea of Buddhism was that there were no gods, and the books were based on the teachings and the life of Buddha. Their laws consisted of the Eightfold Path, and their final outcome was the enlightenment of nirvana.
Judaism was the idea that there was only one God, and they believed in the Torah and Hebrew Bible. Their laws consisted of the 10 Commandments, and the final goal was moral life through the God's law. Jainism was one of the most influential Indian religions that peaked during the late 5th century. It taught that everything possessed a soul and the practice of nonviolence toward living and non-living things. This represented an alternative to traditional cults of Brahmins. People of the Indus Valley Society from 2600 BCE to 1700 BCE lived in enormous and tightly organized cities. The wealthy built big houses and more luxurious graves than the poor. Since their writing system wasn't distinctive, it is hard to determine the stratification in the Indus Valley sites. The Buddha's teaching challenged the Vedic religion and social system. Buddhism welcomed members of all groups. Merchants often embraced the religion because they could make large donations to the Buddhist order and thus improve their social position. The Indian Ocean trade began in 800 AD and lasted until 1500 AD. The major participants of this network was Africa and Asia. Other areas included Kilwa, Sofala, Mombasa, Malindi, and many more. Traders, both foreign and Indian, sailed to the Indian Ocean ports in Dhows and purchased a wide range of goods.
The growth of trade and industries encouraged further expansion of the caste system and had deep implications for the larger structure of the Indian society. One of the most influential religions was Jainism. Jainist doctrines appeared during the 7th century BCE and became popular when the great teacher Vardhamana Mahavira turned to Jainism in the late 6th century BCE. Inspiration for Jainist doctrines came from the Upanishads. The Jains believed that everything in the universe, like humans, animals, plants, the air, bodies of water, and rocks, possessed a soul. Like the Jains, the Buddhists wanted to escape the cycle of incarnation without having to depend on the services of the Brahmins. Also similar to the Jains, they did not support social distinctions based on caste or jati.
Chapter 14, The Expansive Realm of Islam.
Muhammad was born in 570 AD and began his preaching in 613 AD. Along his journey of preaching, he went to Iran and Medina to express his political and religious ideas. In 632 AD, Abu Bakr, who was Muhammad's first successor, ordered that the Prophet's teachings were to be gathered in the Quran. During this time, the Quran was considered the Islamic sacred book. Muhammad dies in 632 AD from a sickness. Islam eventually divided into the Sunni and the Shia. The Sunni was the largest denomination of Islam. This branch took approximately 80 to 90% of Muslim population. The Shia took about 10 to 20% of Muslim population, and this branch believed in the idea that they were descendants of Muhammad. The Abbasid dynasty started in 750 AD. The dynasty was founded by Abul and Abdul Muttalib in 752. The capital of the dynasty shifted to Baghdad. Hinduism is an Indian religion or way of life that was practiced in the Indian subcontinent of Southeast Asia. They believe in the Vedas, which is texts that establish scriptures that were a single force in the universe. They were ones to achieve one-six with the gods and that had repeated a cycle of life and death.
Islam was the second most widespread religion that was established by Muhammad. They believed in the Quran, which was a written text that had all of Muhammad's teachings. That Allah was their only God, they must submit to everything to Allah, and they must follow the 5 pillars of Islam. This included the profession of faith, daily prayers, almsgiving, fasting during Ramadan, and the pilgrimage to Mecca. There are 4 major dynasties that built empires on 3 continents: the Umayyad dynasty 651 to 750 AD, the Abbasid dynasty 750 to 1258 AD, the Umayyads of Al-Andalus, Spain and North Africa 756 to 975 AD, and the Fatimid dynasty 909 to 1171 AD. The major achievement throughout Islam was the Muslim scholars preserved, blended, and expanded their knowledge of mathematics, astronomy, architecture, and medical science. Throughout Islam, Muhammad received revelations from Allah, and the 5 pillars of Islam were established based on Muslims' basic religious duties. The sources of authority of Islam were the Quran and the Sunnah, which established a guide of daily life. Toward the end of this period, Islam divided into the Sunni, the Shia, and the Sufi.
In all parts of the Islamic world, from India to Spain, increased agricultural production played a part in the rapid growth of cities, some with populations of several 100,000 people. During the Abbasid era, paper manufacturing was a new industry that appeared in Islamic cities. It was cheaper and a lot easier to use than other writing materials such as vellum sheets. Arab and Persian mariners borrowed the compass from the Chinese and used it to guide them on the high seas. The lateen sail, a triangular sail that increased the ship's maneuverability, was borrowed from the Southeast Asian and Indian mariners. The astrolabe was borrowed from the Hellenistic Mediterranean. This instrument allowed them to calculate latitude.
Chapter 15: Resurgence of Empires in East Asia.
The major empires in East Asia were located in Japan, the Mongols, China, Southeast Asia, and Korea. Each of these empires had an interaction with one another, which ultimately led to the spread of ideas and traditions. Japan had a distinct geographic and cultural area as they had open access to the islands around them. They believed in the Shinto, which helped establish the Japanese way of life, and they established a feudal system. The Heian period that lasted from 794 to 1185 AD was a major event that occurred in Japan. The Mongols believed in a nomadic way of life. In other words, they migrated frequently, they established a clan-based leadership and a distinct military power that led them to become a strong and flexible empire.
China gained power and order due to the revival of the civil service system. The civil service system required individuals that were running for a government position to take an exam because of the level of competition. Their central government strengthened during the Golden Age, which benefited the culture, science, and technology of the empire. In the Southeastern Asian Empire, there was a major trade route between China and India. This trade route is often known as the Grand Canal and helped spread India's cultural experiences. Just like Japan, Korea had a distinct geographic and cultural area. Their society was divided by wealthy and the people who believed in having an absolute monarchy. Tang Taizong was the emperor of the Tang dynasty and reigned from 626 to 649 AD. Song Taizu was the founder and first emperor of the Song dynasty. He was the ruler for 16 years until he died in 1976 AD. Sui Yangdi was the second emperor of the Sui dynasty. He took over after Emperor Wendi died in 604 AD. He led a rebellion that turned against the south, which eventually led to the conquest of Guangzhou. Zhu He was a Chinese philosopher, politician, and writer of the Song Dynasty. He was considered to be one of the most influential Neo-Confucian in China. Major religions in Japan included Buddhism, Confucianism, and the Shao. Their government believed in the civil service exams and also in feudalism. Japan had many architectures, paintings, and tales that nourished their society.
The era of feudalism in Japan took place from the 12th through the 19th centuries. During this period, local rulers dominated the land, while the emperors held a significant political power.
In the late 6th century, Yang Jian, an ambitious ruler in northern China, embarked on a series of military campaigns that brought all of China once again under centralized imperial rule. The construction of the Grand Canal, the most complex project completed during the Sui dynasty, made the large supplies of rice and other food crops from the Yangtze River Valley available to residents of northern regions. Tang rulers had a communication network based on the Grand Canal, roads, horses, and sometimes human runners. The economic surge of the Tang and Song had significance beyond China because it accelerated trade and production throughout the Eastern Hemisphere for more than half a millennium, from about 600 to 1300 CE. Chinese cultivators increased their productivity by making an increased use of heavy plows, harnessing the oxen in the north and water buffaloes in the south, and enriching the soil with manure and composted organic matter. Technological and industrial developments during the Tang and Song dynasties included porcelain, metallurgy, gunpowder, printing, and naval technology. The search for alternatives to cash led to the invention of paper money during the late 9th century. By the end of the century, government authorities throughout most of China issued printed paper money, complete with serial numbers. Paper money provided a powerful stimulus to the Chinese economy.
Chapter 23, Transoceanic Encounters and Global Connections. Vasco da Gama was a Portuguese mariner and the first European to reach India by sea. He also was the first to link Europe and Asia, which connected the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. Cross-cultural interactions were more beneficial than the past centuries. The advancements of technology and powerful military allowed many European people to go through the ocean. The Russians built an enormous Eurasian empire, which took over some parts of the Pacific Ocean. Cross-cultural interactions were more beneficial than the past centuries. The advancements of technology and powerful military allowed many European people to go through the ocean. The Russians built an enormous Eurasian empire, which took over some parts of the Pacific Ocean. Portuguese mariners were most prominent in finding fresh resources to cultivate the land. In the 15th century, Italian investors worked with the mariners to establish plantations in the Atlantic islands. The Portuguese voyages led to the establishment of plantations in Cape Verde, Sao Tome, Principe, and Fernando Po. Dom Henrique of Portugal, who is also known as Prince Henry the Navigator, promoted voyages in West Africa in order to promote the gold trade, establish new trade routes, gain intelligence, convert people to Christianity, and to make alliances against the Muslims. In the 12th century, Mediterranean mariners established two different types of sails. One was a square while the other was a triangle. The square sails worked well with the winds that would push the ships, but not with the crosswinds. The triangle lateen sails were beneficial because the wind didn't affect it. The Volta del Mar was a strategy established by the Europeans that allowed them to sail from the Canaries to Portugal. As the mariners became more familiar with the variations of winds, they relied on the Volta del Mar to lead them along the coastlines. In 1415, Prince Henry of Portugal conquered the Moroccan port of Ceuta and sponsored voyages along the African coastlines. After Prince Henry of Portugal died, Bartolomé Diaz rounded the Cape of Good Hope and entered the Indian Ocean. This was an opportunity to buy silk, spices, and pepper. Christopher Columbus was a Genoese mariner who proposed sailing to the markets of Asia by the western route. He believed that the Eurasian landmass covered 270 degrees of longitude and that the Earth was a small sphere. Ferdinand Magellan was a Portuguese navigator that believed that the Spice Islands and Asian markets were close to the western coast of the Americas. The most important Pacific explorer was Captain James Cook, who led 3 expeditions to the Pacific and added New Caledonia, Vanuatu, and Hawaii to the European maps of the Pacific. After Cook's voyages, European geographers created an accurate understanding of the world and their people. The English and the Dutch merchants formed 2 powerful companies, the English East India Company and the United East India Company. Both of these companies were privately owned and granted their charters the right to buy, build trading posts, and to even make war in the company's interest. Dutch mariners didn't worry about seeking converts to Christianity. Instead, they concentrated on the trade of spices. Batavia was a policy founded in 1619 by Jan Pieterszoon Coen on the island of Java. Coen's plan was to establish a VOC monopoly over spice production and trade, which allowed Dutch merchants to only deliver spices to VOC members. The 7 Years' War was a global conflict that took place in Europe, India, the Caribbean, and North America. This war eventually led into the French and Indian War that occurred in 1754. The Columbian Exchange was the global diffusion of plants, food, crops, animals, human population, and diseases. In the 16th century, infectious and dangerous diseases brought a major decrease in the population. The Manila Galleons demonstrated the workings of the global economy of the Pacific Ocean basin. Spanish galleons plied the waters of the Pacific Ocean between Manila and the Philippines. From there, they took over Asian luxury goods to Mexico.